We are privileged to interview one of our Pretoria Institute of Architects' eminent members, Aziz Tayob, today. At the PIA, we are busy with a new series, a series called Conversations With. And this is very, very important because we are trying to record memory and some material where our young members can learn from. Aziz, thanks for allowing us into your home, your world and your office. Aziz, let's start with your formative years. I know that you've attended an Afrikaans primary school. Tell us a bit more.
Of my childhood days, they were spent in Brits. It was one of the only Afrikaans medium school in the Transvaal in those days, called the Brits India and Clearlinks School. I attended that school from grade 1 up to standard 4. Thereafter, I had to move to to high school because they only provided primary school in Brits. I left 1 year earlier because my elder brother, he was already in standard 5, and he had to move to Pretoria at my granny's place in Vermeulen Street. I decided I'm not going to go without him, so we both ended up, me in standard 4 and him in standard 5 and him in standard 6. But there was no Afrikaans medium school, another Afrikaans medium school. It was an English medium school. It was the Pretoria Indian and Coloured School in Asiatic Bazaar, Marabastad, Pretoria. It was difficult years because it was a whole adjustment that I had to do. Everything was taught to me in Afrikaans, and suddenly I had to adjust to English, and it was difficult. Probably took me something like 3 years to switch over to English, but yes, that was the early days.
How did you choose architecture, or how did architecture choose you? Because I know that you the first Indian or person of color in South Africa to become a registered architect.
Yeah, if I say it was not a career of choice, my career of choice was medicine. Matriculated in 1960. In those days, and it just so happened that in 1959, the new Education Act was passed, where we had to obtain permits to attend universities in South Africa. And that was also only the 4 open universities. It was Natal, the Cape Town and Wits. Those were the only 3. So I made application to all of them, and I didn't understand the full game, but the minister would grant you permission to attend a university to study for medicine. But the universities would refuse. The following year, 1961, I applied for BSc, for example. Then the minister would decline giving you consent, but the university would accept. And then one understood that these so-called free universities were playing a game with the politicians. They knew on which application they should say yes and which application they should say no. After 3 years of waiting, I decided to go to Pakistan, and I studied a pre-medical introductory course in medicine at the Foreman Christian College in Lahore. I then came back on holiday from Pakistan in 1963, and I contracted encephalitis, and I was bedridden for 6 months. And they told me that I needed to be there for a further year for treatments. In that I again applied, was again refused, and then I took the Minister of Education at that time to court to grant me a permit on medical grounds. If I recall well, it was Senator de Klerk was the Minister of Education at that time. Before we got to court, they then said, okay, we'll give you a permit, but we can't allow you to study medicine because medicine only 3 candidates per university are allowed. In these 3 universities, it means 1 black person, 1 Chinese person, and 1 Indian person. If those seats are filled, we can't accept. So I said, well, what can you give me? They said, we'll give you engineering or architecture. I then, for the first time, started looking at the 2 courses, and I chose architecture. I qualified in '69 as the first black architect or architect of color in South Africa.
Who influenced you, and who really had an effect on what you as an architect eventually became?
My family, it was my father and his 5 brothers were in business together, and they would tell me, we will support you at university if you become a doctor, but if you want to become an architect, there's no support from this business. Because at that time, the Group Areas Act wouldn't allow any new, a person who did not have a business prior to the Group Areas Act would not be granted another business. So that means I had no future to go into business at all. So I just then told them that, but I am going to study. But at the end of that first year, my uncle would tell me, let's see what you've learned from architecture. We want to design a colouring factory. It was called Jolly Jack in Brits, I don't know if you know at that time. But being embarrassed to tell them I didn't still know how to design buildings, I went into my grandfather's strong room, and I looked for plans of other buildings and houses that he had that were passed, and started looking at how plans are done. And with that, I drafted a plan for the colouring factory, did some research on the colouring factory, how the bottling works, and all the things that go with it. Without going into too much length, I produced the building, and City Council, they told me the City Council wants to see you. And I thought I had made some blunders and errors. Fortunately, I had copied everything on that, and it said structure to engineer's drawings. And all these little notes and I told them, all right, I told my uncle, please, will you come with me, because I'm scared. And they told me, have you done this drawing? I said, yes. And but if there's any errors, I'll fix it up. They said, no, would you like to do more drawings? Because everybody brings on a block paper what plans they want, and they draw it freehand, and nobody in Brits has ever drawn an accurate drawing. But anyway, that's the introduction to architecture. I was very fortunate during those years, because Professor Mellows, who taught us, him and a group of other architects, Rhodes Harrison, George Rhodes Harrison, had formed an association with Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, and they were putting up the Carlton Centre. So I was able to work for them during the holidays. And also for a Professor Hanson, it was Hanson, Tompkin and Prince. So during the vacation, I was able to work under them, and it was, call it boom days for the architectural profession, and I was able to be part of this, and was grateful for that. And obviously later years, Glenn Gallagher was the one that influenced me most, and Willem Meyer. Both had just come back from the States. They did their PhDs in urban design and architecture. But still, at the back of my mind, I wanted to do medicine. I thought I'll do it after I've completed architecture.
Before we started this interview, you told me just a story about your mum visiting your office and house that got an award. Maybe you can share it with us.
Yeah, it was all, in fact, this particular house, yes, it is the cubism and also in those days the aspects of the unfinished brickwork, the unfinished concrete, to accept the brutalism as a raw finish. And if one looks at it, it says it was all about you don't put up a building that has got a mess, and then you add a thickness, half-inch thickness of plaster, and then less than a millimeter of paint, and hide everything that you've done. So it was all about exposure. Yes, my mother, when she first saw it, she told me, Aziz, you've run out of money, it looks like, and you're short of paint, but I'll send you some paint. You just tell me when to send it down. The bricks that I've used here, it's got its own little story. When it was about in third year, when I thought I might not be able to practice because the family kept on telling me that most of the contractors are white and no white contractor is going to listen to your supervision. That's why we will not support you, because that's why we want you to switch over. But I thought, let me do a course in brickwork while I'm a student, and there was application forms available to students in architecture to do a bricklaying course. I applied for the bricklaying course, and short story again, the South African Brick Association tore up my application and tore up my check in 4 pieces. And they wrote to a colleague of mine that just returned this check to Aziz Tayob because we had torn it up. He's got no right to apply for a course that is restricted only to whites. So I couldn't do a bricklaying course either. And I then didn't specify a brick that was produced by the South African Brick Association or any member of the Brick Association. And I happened to find these bricks being produced in Lenasia, at a brick plant in Lenasia, which was not a member of the South African Brick Association. And since then, the first 10 years of my career, I designed only with these bricks. Or the South African Brick Association tendered an apology for what they had written to me all about.
Obviously you started practice, and how did you get jobs? I know that you worked for the Bob government, maybe as a client, and maybe you can fill us in about that.
When Botswana became independent in 1976, I was given the opportunity to design shopping centers for Mangope. And the first one that I did was a shopping center in Lehuruchi, which is just outside Zeerust. And the other one is in Tabanchu, which is
in the Free State.
In the Free State.
The 70s.
In the 76, yeah. That's the first time I did a government project. Otherwise, it was all related to housing. I was fortunate that I was flooded with work. And I'm grateful that I've not seen a recession throughout my career.
Tell me, in the 70s, working in Tabanchu, I know there was a law that restricted the movement of Indians in the Free State.
Now it was a little interesting story. When I got this work in Tabanchu, I had to travel to the Free State with a permit. In those days, we were not allowed to touch, or rather, if one is going through the Free State, you must get a permit to go through the area and be out of it within the 12 to 24-hour period. You must be out on the other side. But I happened to get to the Bloemfontein airport, and was disembarking, and the air hostess said, "Sir, you haven't reached Cape Town yet." And I said, "No, I'm disembarking." Yeah, it's life. Like I say, it's interesting, and one just smiles about it, and as one goes through this life. Because I had to be there for 2 days. You couldn't even reside at the hotel. But I was accommodated at the Botswana embassy in Bloemfontein for the night. But here, Tabanchu is in the history of South Africa. It's an amazing experience for me. People were in tatters. In Tabanchu days, it was Mbatu, and Tabanchu was actually Selosesha. And at the end of that session of mine, which I went through with the OK Bazaar's manager, because it was part of a shopping center, there was a restaurant that we went to in Tabanchu. My instructions were to copy whatever is in Tabanchu, copy it in Selosesha.
Your brief.
Yeah, this was my brief. But when we got to the restaurant, we were sitting on the table and chatting away, and realized that after a while, nobody's serving us. So the OK Bazaar's architect approached them and says, "Isn't somebody going to serve us?" They said, "Not until those two black people are outside. There's a special window for them and they should know about it. We serve them through the window. We can't serve them on the table." Then the OK Bazaar's manager said, "He's also coming out with us." Then they told him, "No, you can sit." He says, "No, can we get takeaways?" It was the only restaurant around. So we got takeaways from the open window, from the sidewalk, and we had our meal. And I told him, don't make a fuss. That we can satisfy our hunger is enough. You know, there's nowhere else. The other place is 60 kilometers from here, which is in Bloemfontein. If I take through that, I then understood what Mangopi wanted. And he told us, within 4 months, please open up the petrol station. All the others hasn't agreed, but Trek Garage has agreed to open up a petrol station there, and he says there will be no GST in Babatetswana. The center opened up in 8 months, but the petrol stations were with only a kilometer distance between these two places. The mayor then he went to Cape Town and he asked Parliament to accept Tabanchu as part of Botswana. And this is where Tabanchu became part of Botswana. And I watched a miracle happening here, that over a period of about a year, 2 years, the entire population, they were well dressed, they were well fed, and suddenly there was a transformation without a fight, without a civil war. And this to me was quite an eye-opener. And the most amazing part of Tabanchu was that restaurant, which told us not to sit on those tables. And we had a restaurant, we had designed quite a nice restaurant there. And this lady came and says, "Would you please, could I open up the restaurant in the center of yours?" And in honor of the, when on the last day when we were leaving, and our last trip to Tabanchu, we were given the honor of being her guests, and the most fantastic, call it fish meal that we've ever had was at that restaurant. And I just I couldn't believe that transformed the people themselves. And to me, I only saw good in what was happening.
Did she actually remember that you were that same person that she asked to go to the window?
It was a very good gesture on her part, but I just assured her, I looked through those items.
And I want to ask you about your favorite buildings, highlights in your career.
The number of projects are approximately 1,200 projects that I've done over a 40-odd year career. Of them, the highlights would be the Mpumalanga legislature, which is in Nelspruit. It was the mosque in Laudium, which was also, I call it enjoyable lecture. I enjoyed this house of mine as well. But there are numerous projects where we have won several awards. But I would say among the favorites are approximately 50 of them. But it's if I could say that, when one enjoys a project, it is understood that one doesn't earn out of it.
Yeah.
One pays for it. But when one spends a lot of time, one begins, and if one is able to enjoy that time, then it is worthwhile to say that let's do it well.
I think let's move on to the mosque.
The mosque was, I had done my thesis project qualifying for architecture was the design of mosques. The group areas had uprooted a lot of people in the communities, and among them being Muslims, and I being a Muslim myself. I didn't know much about mosque design at that stage, and I was approached many times as a student. People asked to consult me about mosques. I couldn't until I had done this thesis. And it is when I understood religion more than I had. We also have madrasa or Sunday school equivalent type of classes. But I had never learned so much about religion than during the process of doing that thesis on the mosques. But this one was interesting also because the clients also said, we just want a mosque. What do you want in it? Now you work it out. And so I did all my research on what's required, the size of the population that I'll be dealing with. And it so happens that this mosque is also done out of natural brick. And the client wanted a white mosque, like my mother wanted a white mosque for my white house for myself. And I kept on telling the client, okay, but they told me white was a favored color. And I decided, on the background of it, the Prophet Muhammad, when he was when he went into exile to Medina, for a brief period he sought refuge in a cave, which was described as a red, brown, rocky cave. And I looked at this and I wanted to reproduce something cave-like for the mosque. And so my interior of the mosque is made out of a reddish brick, which is the color of the soil that we are here which is here in Lodium. And so my choice of brick was a red brick. But to make it look old and antique and rustic, I deliberately chose three color ranges of red. And when we see the mosque, then you'll see this coming out. But they kept on reminding me, well, the construction was going on. But are you doing a white mosque? I says, paint is the last item that gets added onto the building, so don't worry, it will come. So at the end, at the opening of the mosque, it was still red brick, and they asked me when. I said, but we've run out of money. As soon as we've accumulated more money, then we'll have the red brick, or rather the white mosque. And that's how, and I got them used to it, and now they don't know why they asked me why I should do a white brick.
Did you draw every brick? Because it feels like every brick belongs where it should be.
If I look back at it, I studied in Lahore. Lahore has got, at that point in time, it had approximately 900 mosques in this one town. And the biggest mosque is the Badshai Masjid in Lahore, which accommodates approximately 1 million people. Sure. And it's also, coincidentally, it happens to have reddish sandstone material, and it was done during the Mughal period. And if you look at the detailing of that mosque, so the detailing comes from my period of studying medicine in Lahore.
So nothing is in vain.
And life, it almost came. I couldn't understand where it was coming from, but it always in my subconscious mind, of my past experiences, and it almost came naturally as I was detailing all facets. But each brick, at the end of the day, it's the early my early tutors who taught me how to detail. And I would draw each brick, even the brick that I wanted to be cut to a certain size, I would detail. Sometimes an architect is portrayed as somebody who's terrible. They come on site and they say, we don't like it, so break it down. I said, if I don't like something, then I must show the contractor what is it that I want exactly, so that I could point to him on the drawing that this is how I've detailed it and this is how you have not done it. So you follow my drawing and you'll be okay with me. But I will not be unfair to you and sell you something which I don't like, which I did not detail.
I think we can learn a lot from that, because detailing is also on a design. Because there's this perception that technical documentation is one subject and design is another subject. But I think we can learn from you that it's actually integrated. It's actually one. I want to move on with this detailing in mind to the Mpumalanga building. And I think their detailing also played a major part, and the skills transfer. So I want to first start at the end. If you can just maybe tell us about how did you design for skills transfer?
It just so happens that the two domes, the mosque in Roshni, in Lodium, and the dome that I chose over the Parliament Chamber, the Provincial Parliament Chamber, was done at the same period. And the two sort of brushed off with each other. Obviously, the scale of the Mpumalanga dome is huge. We had spoken to the client and told them that if we have to achieve a skills transfer, we need to allocate some funds for it so we could enforce it. And here we said that we need to establish a little container college on site, where the lay person from the outside can be brought in and taught the skills by the contractor. And I think an amount of 3 million was set aside for it. And with this we established the college on site for the electricians, to train them in brickwork, in plasterwork, in masonry work, plumbing, and all the trades. And the contractors ran that quite well. And it was also part of my supervision that I had to supervise over that facet of it. The dome was not my influence on Islam, but it was a hut that I had seen on my site tour of the site and its environments, and I saw a little stone hut that was built, and there's a photograph of it in this book that we have done, The Making of an African Building. It's a little hut, and I saw this hut, and there was a dome in the background of the rocky hill crop. It was so I looked at that and I looked at this and I said, well, the circular shape would be the right shape for me. And so this is where the concept came from. But to solve the problem, many of my colleagues phoned me to say, will you agree to join us and tell us to write to the judges and tell them that the brief with their restriction on the height will not be able to accommodate. We will not be able to accommodate. And I had told Hanif and the other architects working on the project that doesn't say we can't go below ground. I said, but there's a water table. I said, a water table, Venice is built on water. What's this water table about? There's nothing. You just pump the water out. And whatever, if I look at 900 odd buildings that have been built of the 1,200 odd projects, some of them have been, when I say 1,200 projects, some of them have been studies and reports. So I treated this as a project, whether it was an urban report, it didn't end up as a building. But of the 900 odd buildings, I have enjoyed most of them. I don't need a degree. I don't need a piece of paper. If I can just get the knowledge, it'll be adequate. And this has been my approach. And I just say all the people came to me at the right time. All the people wrote anything that may have been against me did not work at the end against me. It only worked for my own benefit.